Hey, what's up, everybody? We're here with Mark Denney. Now, if you don't know Mark Denney and you don't know what he's done in the past handful of years, it's pretty remarkable, actually. Mark has gone from a complete beginner in photography for the most part, taking some workshops and then going pro in just a very handful of years. And that's what I wanted to talk to Mark today about. But if you don't really trust that story, just look at his YouTube page and over 200,000 subscribers as of now. Mark, welcome into the podcast. And first, why don't you give us an idea of who you are, how you got started, and what brought you to where you are right now?
Hey everyone, my name is Mark Denney. I'm a full-time landscape photographer based out of North Carolina, and I've kind of always had this on again, off again kind of love affair with photography from when I was a kid. But when I went to college, that I guess attractiveness, if you will, to photography quickly waned, and I didn't pay attention to photography. I didn't pick up a camera. I didn't even own a camera in college, and didn't go to school for anything in the visual arts. So it was just something that was completely dismissed. And I didn't start paying attention again to photography really seriously until about 8 years ago. I think I got a Canon Rebel TI Niner. I don't even know what the naming convention of it is, but I started to kind of dabble around in that. And, much like anything or anyone who's into photography can probably relate to this, that once the bug gets you, it's really, really hard to kind of shake it off. And after kind of dabbling around with just, trying to get better at the camera again, like I was when I was younger, and I started to do it a little bit more and a little bit more. And I started to get to the point where I was like, you know what? Maybe I could make some money doing this. So it kind of turned into this little side hustle. I was still in the corporate world and I was very happy doing that. And I remember thinking to myself, if I could just find a way to maybe pay for a camera lens, or maybe buy a new camera bag, or maybe buy a plane ticket to go somewhere, that would be a win. And once I did that, then I said, oh, maybe I can buy a new camera body. And it just kind of built from there. And it just, the side hustle turned into a real passion of mine. And then kind of the rest is history. It's kind of a long-winded answer.
I feel like the ultimate camera that you get when you first start out is like the Rebel T, whatever they're on. I think mine was a T2i when I started.
Yeah, it seems it's the Rebel T something or the Nikon D3200
Yeah,
or 3300.
exactly.
Everybody seems to start with, because I bought one of those too. So I had both of them.
Let's go for kind of setting up this journey for you, going from beginner to pro where you are right now. Starting out, where were you skill wise, and even where were you confidence wise?
So, oh, that's a good question. Confidence wise, I think I had false hope. I think I'm generally a fairly confident person in most of the things that I kind of set out to do, because if I'm not good at it, I'm gonna figure it out. It's just kind of like my mentality. I've got a little bit of OCD, so if I know that if I'm not gonna perform well at something, I'm gonna figure it out how to get better at it. And skill wise, I mean, I was a complete total novice. I wasn't using the automatic modes. Well, I shouldn't say that. I wasn't using fully automatic mode. The majority of the time I was using aperture priority. But at that time, in the very beginning stages, I really didn't even pay attention to landscape or outdoor photography. I had my mindset that I wanted to kind of turn this into a little bit of a side hustle. And I thought to myself, well, the only way to do that is to really take photos of people. So I started taking, kind of marketing on Facebook, like little portrait sessions or photographing events and things like that. And I did not a ton of them. I mean, I don't know, maybe 10 or 15 of those. And I quickly realized that I really just didn't enjoy it very much. It made me nervous and kind of anxious to have to pose or tell people how to kind of stand and how to look. And it was just, to me, it just felt very, very awkward. So I'm trying to remember exactly the very first landscape photo, or photo that I would consider a landscape photo, was actually taken at a lake in my neighborhood. And I remember I went there before sunrise, and I got there like an hour before sunrise, which at that time I was like, why in the world did I do this? So I sat there forever, and I just remember it was so enjoyable. It was so relaxing. It was so peaceful. I was the only person there and never saw a car or anything. And I took an absolutely horrendous photograph. I actually took about 20 versions of this horrible photo, but I just remember it was just so enjoyable and just so kind of peaceful and tranquil. And then that was really when I started to gravitate more towards outdoor photography, just because it was relaxing and just like very chilled out, and I really like that.
And for those of you watching live on YouTube, Facebook, LinkedIn, or Instagram, let us know how you started and maybe where you are on the journey right now, beginner, intermediate, maybe you're more on the professional side. But Mark, in that journey, how did you build your confidence coming out of that? I mean, you just talked about that first little trip you took to your lake, and going from that and then building your confidence. What were your steps that you took?
I really started to listen to podcasts. I really just got to a point to where I wanted to consume as much information on landscape photography as I possibly could. After that very first initial attempt that I just mentioned, I wish I had the photo. Oh, anyway, it's tucked away somewhere. But I started to, that was kind of the moment where I was like, okay, I really enjoy this. I want to do more of these. And I started to just kind of look things up on the internet, read articles, listen to podcasts, watch YouTube videos, just to try and teach myself as much information as I possibly could on the genre of landscape photography. And that was really where I would say the kind of bug really did to kind of get a hold of me, is when I started to learn a little bit more. That increased my confidence, and the more that I learned, the more that I felt that I enjoyed it a little bit better, because I had an idea of what I wanted to do, or I had an idea of how to compose, or I had an idea of the best time of day to photograph under certain conditions. And the more I learned, the more kind of momentum. It's kind of like the snowball rolling down a hill, kind of a analogy.
Would you say that's how most people get rolling? That snowball rolling downhill is the building confidence goes?
Yeah, I think so. I think that once you learn a little bit, it leads to a lot. It's kind of like the first couple of steps are the hardest part. But once you can get over those hurdles and you start to see a little bit of momentum, it's kind of like when you start working out at the gym. The first few weeks are brutal. You can't even walk down your stairs. You can't lift your arm. Everything hurts. You're wondering why on earth you're doing this. But the second you notice a difference, and you look at yourself, you're like, oh, okay, all right, I can see a little something coming out here. Then you kind of have that gusto to kind of keep going back, and you want to get better and better and better. And I remember the first time I took a landscape photograph that I looked at, and I was like, you know what? That's not horrible. It's maybe a 2 out of 10 as opposed to a 0 out of 10 where I was at. That was huge for me. I was like, okay, all right. And it just got to this point to where I couldn't stop thinking about it. I went to bed thinking about it. I woke up thinking about it. And it was just, I became absolutely obsessed over it. But yeah, I think that that's how a lot of people kind of get that momentum, is when you first see that improvement, then it's all history from there. Then you're hooked.
Is that when you would say you started to turn a corner?
Um, no, I don't think it was then, because this was so many years ago. This was probably like 7 years ago when I really started to feel like I was getting a little bit better. I would say that I started to turn a corner when I really started to think about, could this possibly be something that I could make a full-time career out of? And when that started to slowly become a possibility, that was when I think I started to turn a corner, because my mindset completely shifted from side hustle to maybe I can make it become a career. And I would say that was when I think I started to work even harder. I tried to learn even more, and the days and the hours that I put into it got very long. And I quickly just became obsessed with trying to turn that side hustle into a full-time career. But I think that transition, when it started to feel like it could possibly be a reality, is when that really started to shift.
When you shift that confidence and that mindset, so many people, when they start with landscape photography, one of their biggest worries is confidence. Am I good enough? Am I doing this right? In that mindset, how did you create one of positivity and one that you knew you were going to move forward with this and really tackle it head on?
Um, you know, I that's an interesting question. Hmm, I think that when I don't know, I'm trying to think exactly, kind of back in time exactly. It just got to a point to where, I'm a naturally positive person anyway. My wife might not disagree. She would probably say I'm a pessimist, but I think I'm an optimist. But I'm always thinking of if something looks glaringly like it's going to be a negative, I will definitely try and figure out to put some type of spin on it to make it more positive or something that'll be more beneficial to myself. And sure, there was a ton of, downtimes, a ton of not downtime, like there's nothing to do, but times that just things did not seem like they were going to work out in my favor. But throughout my entire life, whenever I was not good at anything, I kind of knew that there was a good chance that I could outwork myself to get to a point to where I could improve. And I just knew that if I just continue with that same thought track that I've had my entire life, that I can dig myself out of any type of potential situation I was in. Because there's a couple times, even just a few years ago, where I was like, I'm not good enough to do this. I don't have what it takes. And then, you have that bad day. And then, that's the beauty of the sun. It comes up the next day, you have a fresh start again, and you can easily shift your perspective. So I think just having that mindset for myself really, really helped out on those days where I kind of lacked a little bit of confidence, just knowing that I could work myself out of this hole.
How have you worked on that, like as we go on? And I know you alluded to it just a second ago. Imposter syndrome can sneak up on you in photography, especially when we're inundated with photos every single day. How do you maintain that, like when you went pro to where you are now?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think it's something that all photographers are always trying to strive is how to be unique, how to make your photos stand out. And I think that a kind of a turning point for me is when I started to see photographers' work that I followed, and I would see one of their photographs pop up, let's say on Instagram, and without seeing who posted it, I would instantly know whose it was. And when I don't think everybody can do that. I think it takes a little bit of skill. Like when I was first starting out, there was no way I could be able to see a photograph and tell whose photo it was. But I think as you kind of progress with your editing and your post processing and the way that you compose a photograph, you start to realize what you like in your own photos and what you appreciate in your own work. And you can also see that translated into other people's work. So when I started to be able to notice other people's images based off of the photograph itself or the way that they edited it, that was something that really stuck out for me, because I was like, that's kind of like the ultimate goal, in my opinion, is for people to identify your work without your name being on it. And that's something that I'm always striving to do. And I'm nowhere even close to that point yet. But every once in a while, I'll get a comment from someone and say like they were scrolling through something, and they're like, "Oh, I knew this was your photo before I even saw your name on it." And to me, that's like the ultimate compliment, because I think that's a great kind of a unique stamp that you have on your own work.
Now that you are pro and you're doing this full time, I would consider that the definition of a professional. Now that you are pro in photography, is the drive different than when you started and you were hustling to make this a full-time gig?
Yeah, totally. And the timing of all this is really ironic. I'm actually working on a video for next week all about going pro, and because this is actually my 4-year anniversary this month. And it's been on kind of on the top of my mind a lot this entire month, is kind of reflecting and thinking back of it all on everything. But oh my gosh, I forgot the question now. Dang it. Well, hit me with it again.
Just the drive, like, is the
Yeah.
drive now of actually being pro, is it different than when you started and you were trying to do it pro?
Yeah. So I think what I noticed the most now is that when it was a side hustle or I was trying to get to a point to where I could go pro, the photography took center stage. And now it almost feels like, I mean, some months will go by and the photography is like in last place. It's not even in the same auditorium, let alone center stage. But because there's so many other things from, workshops or I mean, the financial aspect of it all to the marketing side of things to there's just so many other things that go into play to with full-time landscape photography that a lot of times the photography aspect kind of gets lost in translation a little bit. Someone had left a comment on a video a couple of weeks ago, and it really stuck with me then, because they said that when you become a professional, you have all the time in the world to photograph, and that's how professionals get better. And I completely disagree, because I've never had less time ever. And I think that at least every professional photographer I know would echo that same sentiment, that they have less time now to do actual photography than ever. I feel like you have the most time when it's kind of a hobby. But the drive, to get back to your question, the drive has been burning, or the fire has been burning, hotter than ever for me to constantly get improved, to continually improve. I kind of have that mentality of always wanting to get better. And it's one of my favorite aspects of photography is that you really can't perfect it. At least in my mind, maybe somebody has, I don't know who they are, but I think that, like, how boring would something be if you perfected it? And like there was nowhere to go. You figured everything out. I feel like that would be the most boring thing in the world, because, like, what are you going to do? You just kind of keep doing what you're doing. But with photography, I think you can always get better. There's always something to learn. There's always something to improve upon. There's always different techniques. So my drive to improve is I feel like it builds every year.
I think, like, from my experience too in doing this, that second that you feel like you have mastered it, you lose complete motivation in what you're actually going out and shooting. And then that's when you start shooting less. And that's when you start to realize, hey, maybe I should take a different approach, try a different technique, learn something new. And I think that's the beauty of photography, whether you are a beginner just starting out or intermediate, or whether you are a pro, is there are always these little techniques to learn. And that can be on your camera, in your settings. That could be using a different lens or a different technique with your camera in the field. That could be Lightroom, Photoshop, sharpening an image in a separate platform. There's so many ways that you can learn and grow and get better. Now that you are doing so well, Mark, what are some of those things that you're learning right now to keep you ready, to keep you on edge, and to keep you willing to improve constantly day after day?
So I have, and I've spoke about this a few times, but I feel like I don't want to speak for others, but when I first started out, the very first lens I got, that wasn't a kit lens, was a wide angle lens. And that's all that I had. So naturally, all of my photographs were wide angle photographs. And I loved it. That was, I think the Grand Vista is still an extremely popular style of photography, but it really was quite a few years ago as well. And I kind of got in this, I don't want to say a rut, but like every one of my photographs were taken with this same lens. And that's what I was used to composing with. And once I started to get, other lenses, I would just buy an even better wide angle lens, or maybe an even wider lens, an ultra wide lens. So many of my photographs were the Grand Vista, which I still absolutely love. But what year is it? 2022. So last year, I was at the Out of Acadia conference, and I was working with Sarah Marino and Ann Belmont, and they have inspired me so much to just kind of think a little bit differently. And after hanging out with them in Acadia and in the Smokies this spring, I have just had such an attraction to smaller scenes. Now, not necessarily like macro stuff, but just looking at things a little bit differently than I used to. So I would say some of my favorite photographs that I've captured this year aren't the typical wide scenes that I go after. Now, a lot of them are taken with a telephoto lens, not shooting off into the distance, but shooting down or just finding little abstract scenes. And I think that that is something that not only has improved my photography, but perhaps most importantly, has made me enjoy photography even more. Because when I used to go to a scene to capture my wide angle scene, because that's all I was really used to doing, if the sky wasn't cooperating, if it was a bland sky, I can't tell you how many times I would just pack up my stuff and go home, because that's kind of, I guess, the drawback a little bit on a grand vista is if the sky isn't interesting, it's going to kind of ruin your shot, because more than likely the sky is going to have a large proportion of your image, or it's going to cover a large portion of your image. So you kind of need an interesting sky. But being able to kind of shift your focus to maybe a smaller scene, maybe not looking straight out, but looking down or looking against a cliff or whatever it is. Maybe it's just a close-up shot of moving water. There's so many different ways to capture a scene without just capturing the grand vista. And by me kind of practicing these smaller scenes, it increased my confidence. I got a little bit better. But now I feel like I can go to a location and regardless of what the conditions are, still come away with something that is interesting. And to me, that's kind of my ultimate goal, is to always try and be able to create something that I'm inspired by, regardless whether there's fog or mist or an epic sunrise or sunset.
Well, I think that plays into what you were talking about earlier too, of being a consistently positive person and having that right spin, because somebody could easily go into that situation and say, well, you know what, I didn't even get anything today, I'm just going to pack it up. And you know what, tomorrow I'm just going to stay in bed, I'm going to hit the snooze button because ain't nothing happening out here right now. And I think having that positive spin, having that mindset of going out and learning these new techniques helps you come away with way more photos in the can than you would originally having a more negative outset. Would you agree?
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. Yeah. I can't tell you how I used to stare at weather apps constantly. I was obsessed with that app Clear Outside, that measures the likelihood of high clouds versus low clouds or medium clouds to predict a sunset or sunrise. And I can't tell you how many times I wouldn't even go because the app said that it was the likelihood or the conditions were not going to be there. And now I really don't. I mean, I still pay attention to the weather, of course, but I don't pay attention to cloud cover quite as much as I used to. I'll still check it from time to time, but I don't obsess over it, mainly because I feel more confident now that I don't need the optimal conditions to create something.
What's your subscriber count right now?
I don't know, actually.
Do numbers matter to? I think a better question: do numbers even matter to you?
No, I mean, I think that I do pay attention a little bit, but I think it's like around 215,000 right now.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
But I got to a point to where I started to pay too much attention, not necessarily to like subscriber numbers, but to analytics. Because of course, we put a lot of effort into these videos, and I want to make sure that I'm creating content that people want to watch. And I got to a point to where I was kind of paying a little bit too much attention to analytics, and it started to create an unhealthy mindset for myself. Where you're just kind of sitting there like refreshing the app on your phone over and over and over again, and it's just it wasn't healthy anymore. But I would say the last year I haven't paid nearly as much attention overall as I used to. I've put a major effort this year into kind of my own mental health and making sure that I'm not working myself to the bone, because, well, anyone who's kind of watched my older videos knows that I kind of looked at this whole full-time photography as an experiment. I gave myself 12 months. I was like, if it works out, then I'll continue for another 12 months. And now it's been 4 years. So now I'm at the point now where I'm like, okay, this is my full-time career. I cannot go back to the corporate world, because how am I going to explain it and be like, all right, Mr. Denney, what have you been doing the last 4 years? So that doesn't look that great. So this is what I got. This is what I got to do forever now. And I'm so grateful for that opportunity, but I have to think longevity. And I'm going to be useless if I burn myself out. So I've put a lot of effort into my own mental health and trying to make sure that I position myself to be the most effective version of myself for the longest amount of time possible.
Would you say that YouTube is the attribute that has helped you go pro so fast?
Yeah, absolutely. I think YouTube, and I still believe this, I think YouTube is probably the best way to get yourself out there as fast as possible. It's definitely not a quick fix. It's a ton of work to do it, however you want to do it. But I do think that that was a huge catalyst for myself. That and out of Chicago, they gave me a lot of opportunities in the very beginning to prove myself, which I'm forever grateful to Chris Smith and those guys there. But yeah, I think YouTube definitely launched things for me.
There's so many photographers who want to do YouTube and look at it as a way to grow their business as a photographer and go full time. How are photographers not using YouTube correctly?
That's a good question. I still feel like I'm trying to kind of figure it out. I think the tough thing about these things, like, and now we got Vero kind of making a comeback, and Instagram's been on the down. I mean, that's a whole nother discussion. But I feel like these platforms, they change constantly, and it's kind of hard to not only decipher the changes, but also understand when changes are happening and understanding how you're going to position yourself to take advantage of the change. And I'm at the point now to where I really am not paying a whole lot of attention to all these changes on social media. I kind of just continue to do what I do. And as long as things are working somewhat, then I'm just going to keep doing it. But I'm not 100% certain how other photographers are using YouTube, but I definitely believe that it's a great way to just get people to see who you are and hear your voice, maybe hear what you have to say and see your photographs. I just think it's a lot more of an engaging experience for the viewer as opposed to maybe just seeing a photograph on Twitter or Instagram.
What are the ways that you're organizing your videos specifically to help you grow, and kind of how do you go about choosing those topics that are right for your audience?
So I started creating something that I call it's a parking lot. This is kind of a carryover from my corporate days. But whenever I get just an idea, I just put it in this digital notepad on my iPhone. It's nothing fancy. I think it's the notepad app that comes with your phone. And I just kind of take these ideas and put them in the parking lot as soon as they pop into my mind. And that list is now over 150 video ideas. So every week I'll just kind of pop in there and figure out, what's something that jumps out at me. What do I think is something that might interest other people? What is something that I would have found useful, 5 or 6 years ago? And that's kind of where I get a lot of my ideas, because a lot of the things that I talk about are kind of teaching to a former version of myself. That's one of the most powerful things I've ever heard, is teaching to a former version of yourself. And when I first heard that, I was like, what does that even mean? But you kind of got to stop and think about it for a second. But everybody was a beginner at something at some point. So if you can really tap into that experience when you were starting out and create something that would have helped your former self, there's a good chance that information will help somebody else who's getting started in whatever that is, whether it's swimming or golf or photography or whatever it is. But I always try and figure out, what is something that I would have found beneficial 5 to 8 years ago, because in my experience, those are things that will definitely help out other people as well.
I think that's a really great segue, because we can talk about like YouTube and going full time and doing workshops and all this stuff. But I think one of the most powerful things that we could talk about right now, because a lot of people are interested in this, is how can somebody say they have the drive and passion for photography? Maybe they're a little bit afraid to put themselves out there and be in front of the camera or do anything like that. In today's world, I mean, it's not too different than 4 years ago when you started this journey. But in today's world, how does somebody go from beginner, novice, camera straight out of the box to pro?
You just got to start. You just got to do it. I wish there was a better answer, but at the end of the day is just do it. You just got to get started. That's the hardest part. That's what is the saying? The best time to start something is yesterday. I think that's what the saying is. Anyway, when I first heard that, that really resonated with me. That if you have the desire to do anything, you just got to get going. And it's just like I was mentioning earlier about when you start exercising. The hardest part is just getting going. And then once you see one tiny result, when you take that first photograph and you're looking at it and you're like, wow, I did something that I saw online and I wanted to put it into practice. And here's the end result. And it looks awesome. And when you feel that momentum start to build, you just got to run with it. And I think that anybody who wants anything bad enough, I think you'll make it work. I really, really do. And I think that like I said, the hardest part is just to get going. I think that's the number one thing that stops people is just not starting. I hear from people all the time that want to start a YouTube channel, and do I think it's too saturated? People have been talking about YouTube being too saturated for the past 10 years. And every year there's other channels that just started just a few months ago that are doing absolutely fantastic. So I don't think it's ever too late to start anything, but you just kind of got to get going and just, get yourself to that point to where you can see that one piece of improvement. I think that, look, when I started, my goal was never to become pro. And maybe there are people out there that have that have like, don't even own a camera yet. And maybe they do want to. They already know they want to go from beginner to pro. But that wasn't me. I just kind of started slowly, and it just kind of, I started to see a little bit of improvement. I started to really feel the enjoyment of it. And then it got to a point where I was like, oh, maybe I could make a career out of this. But I think just getting going, that's the hardest part. If you can do that, you'll be good.
You said, I wish I had a better answer for this, but that was the best answer that you literally could have given. It goes into like procrastination.
Yeah.
And like you said earlier, finding the right time or finding the time to be able to do this. And you really got to ask yourself, when am I actually going to start this? Am I going to start in a couple hours? Tomorrow? Maybe I'll start next week. Maybe I'll start next month. Maybe I'll tackle it then. You're always going to find an excuse to not start. I mean, even in the smallest thing, you're always going to be like, well, you know what? I can't go live today. I haven't showered. My hair's a mess. Look, I'm a mess right now. I haven't showered in a couple days. I'm not ashamed of that. I throw on a hat, throw on a shirt, and I'm good to go. But I think you're always going to find those excuses to starting, and it doesn't go away. Especially for me, I'd love to hear your feedback on that. Like, does that even go away for you?
The kind of procrastination of things?
Yeah.
Oh no, yeah, I'm actually a very bad procrastinator. I have a horrible trait where I put difficult things off and I tackle tons of easy things. And I forgot the guy's name. He's a YouTuber, Ali Abdul. I'm not sure I probably butchered his name, but he said something in a video, this is a while ago, that really resonated with me. If there's something really, really difficult that that you have to accomplish, if you just set a timer for 5 minutes and start that task, even though you're only going to do it for 5 minutes, it'll change everything. Because the hardest thing is starting, and I've done that many times. I set a timer and I start doing it, and what happens is that 5 minutes elapses. I turn that timer off, and before I know it, I've already put 30 minutes or an hour into that hard project. And I realized that not only did I make a lot of progress, but it's not as difficult as it was, because that hardest part is just starting. And when he said that, I honestly didn't think much about it, but I was like, I'll try anything once. So I was like, let me put this into action. And it really does work. But that just kind of goes in line with the hardest part is just starting. So every time there's something difficult that I'm procrastinating on, I do that 5 minute rule, and it works.
In terms of like, maybe let's break this conversation down, maybe not from beginner to pro. We've covered just starting. And I think the natural question that people would have next is how? How do I go? How do I go about doing that? And there are multiple ways, obviously, and maybe take it from your experience of just starting out and what you did as the steps were.
Right. I think that, knowing what I know now, I think the most important thing is to understand what you want to get out of it, because a professional photographer, the term professional photographer looks a million different ways and it looks different to a lot of different people. And I think asking yourself what you want your version of professional photographer to look like is definitely something you want to try and answer sooner rather than later if you can. But I would definitely say that probably one of the very first things you want to do, or that I did, is the website. I put like when my days in the corporate world were starting to come to an end, I could kind of feel that there was something sweeping that was about to change in my role. And I already had a website. It was very clunky, but it was something I didn't put a whole lot of effort in, but I knew that I felt that this big change was going to happen. And I knew that a website was going to be kind of my central hub if I wanted to try and make this transition to full-time photography. And I put so much work in my website in the very, very beginning, in the months leading up to this, to my departure from my corporate job. But I really do feel that a website kind of it really becomes your central hub, because the funny thing about photography is that even though I have my photography business, like my photography business is called Mark Denney Photography, but I never actually say those words. So when you become a full-time photographer, your name kind of becomes your brand. And that is really what you're building. You're building your brand, like David Johnston, Mark Denney. That's a brand and that's your business. So your website really becomes that central hub where you distribute all of the information about, what you're doing, what you're selling, or just information you're giving away to people for free, just to kind of help them get started themselves. So I would definitely say that putting a lot of effort in your website is very important to do as fast as possible. And I am not a website developer. I'm actually not that computer literate, but I use Squarespace, and this is not a plug or anything, but I find it to be very, very easy to use. And I still use them for my website. And I think I've gone through probably 3 different iterations of my website now. And I'm pretty proud of where it's at at this moment. But it's something that I am constantly tweaking and changing, because it's like I said, it's your kind of headquarters for your brand. So it's very important.
I think so too, and I think getting your name out there with a website is
Yeah.
obviously essential. I remember, and we can play off like just start and just get it up. 80% done is better than 100% perfect and never published.
Yeah.
So you
Nobody
can
sees the 20%.
exactly. So
Yeah.
you can create something that isn't perfect to your standards, continue to tweak it. If I remember back to my first website, I had on there like, this is like so embarrassing and vulnerable of me, but I had on there like everything. I had portraits.
Oh yeah.
I was like, hey, I'm going to be a wedding photographer. You know what? Let's throw pets into the mix. I'll do it all. And I went, and the second I hit publish, I went and turned the volume on my phone, and I was like, no, phone call's going to be rolling in any second, man. And I can remember the first call I got from my website, and it was to do like this dog photography session, and the whole thing was absolutely terrible. Like the whole experience, the photos were bad. I had no idea what I was doing. But that aside, it was all due to I just started and I put
Yep.
myself out there, and I took that first step to get my footprint on the web. And it I want to ask you this though. If somebody maybe doesn't have the desire to go pro, like you said, you didn't really have the desire to go pro right off the bat, but you're putting up this website, this is your central hub. If somebody just wants to be like a good photographer, Do you think they need to have a website on that?
Um, mm, I think it comes back to what they want out of it. But even if you have no desire to go pro, I think a website is still a good way to just kind of put your portfolio out there. But there's some photographers out there that I know that are absolutely fantastic, and they don't have any social media. They don't have a website. They don't want anyone looking at their photographs. They don't care if anybody likes their photos. They don't want anyone contacting them. But that's what they want out of photography. So it kind of all goes back to, asking yourself, what do you really want out of it? But for me personally, yeah, I would still get a website. I had a website before I had any inclination of going professional. But I'm trying to think why I even actually started the website to begin with. I think it was because I just felt in my mind that you had to have one. So I was like, all right, well, I'm not going to mess up the trend here. Got to have a website. I'll get a website. And but it just kind of evolved into what it is today.
And we are not sponsored by Squarespace, by the way. I feel like I have to say that since we're live, but I'm not against it.
No.
What was that first website like for you?
It was, I kind of had the same story that you did. Like I was so excited to hit publish, and I spent months agonizing over just the smallest little details. And I hit publish, and I was thinking, I don't even know what I really thought was going to happen, but I hit publish and nothing happened for days and weeks and months. Zero. I don't even know if anyone even looked at the website. And that's honestly the biggest issue with creating a website is you can create the most amazing website on the web, but you have to find a way to drive traffic to it. And that's where social media really, really helps. Is that's a great way to drive traffic to your website, and YouTube helps to do that as well. But just creating a website is only half the battle. You have to figure out a way to get eyeballs on your site, and that's a lot of times that's the hardest part.
It's difficult for sure. I do think there are like some forgotten people when we talk about beginner to pro. And it's the forgotten section that's in the middle that's not even mentioned in the title. And those are the intermediate photographers. A lot of people talk about, here's what you do when you take a camera out of the box. Here's how you set it up. Here's how you do the basic settings, basic composition, and all that. If somebody knows all that, they've got composition down, they kind of just need some places to go shoot and practice and get better. What advice would you have for them to continue to improve their photography and work on it?
I would say to try and put yourself in the most uncomfortable positions as you possibly can, because I'm a firm believer of the more comfortable you are in anything, the less likely you're going to grow. And I've seen this in my professional life. I've seen this in my personal life, that in order to really grow, you have to be uncomfortable. You have to put yourself in situations where you don't know what the outcome is going to be. You don't know if you're going to succeed. You don't know if you're going to fail, but you're going to try. So I would say figure out what is different. What is something different that you can do? For me, was to focus on smaller scenes. That was a complete departure from what I used to do. And I was very uncomfortable doing it. I felt like I was wasting my time and this was ridiculous. But once I saw that one little, I'm holding up two fingers. When I saw that little bit of progress, that was enough. That's all I really need to get me hooked on that. But just thinking about how can I make myself uncomfortable today? I know it's a very odd thing to think about, but I think it's the path to growth in anything. And I think that for the advanced or the intermediate photographer, that's one of the biggest, I don't want to say issues, but it's one of the biggest obstacles, is because you get good at doing one or two or three things and you kind of stick with that. That's exactly what I did. I felt like I was okay at a few things and I just stuck there for years. But when I started to kind of expand, put myself in uncomfortable situations, I felt that my photography really improved. And I also enjoyed photography even more because I felt like I wasn't just in this little box. I felt like there was more things I could do. So just, make yourself uncomfortable.
What is an uncomfortable situation for you?
speaking in front of large amounts of people,
I
not
wasn't. I was
camera.
gonna say besides doing like public speaking.
Yeah, so that the public speaking is something I'm definitely getting better at. But I remember at my first Outsiders event, you were a part of one of those, David, and or both of those. And there were, just quite a few people in the crowd, and it's you get up there on the main stage, and it's very, very nerve wracking. But I kept telling myself, Mark, this is kind of a part of what you're trying to build. So you better embrace it, and you know that you're going to be uncomfortable doing it, but it's going to lead to progress. It's going to lead to you getting better at something. So I think embracing the uncomfortable factor of things really helps me to stay positive in situations that I mean, let's face it, nobody likes doing things they don't think they're good at. And when people are bad at things, there's plenty of things I'm bad at. I usually don't like to do those things. So that's kind of the thing with public speaking. Everyone thinks they're bad at public speaking. Not everyone, but it's the biggest fear out there is public speaking. So most people shy away from it. But once you just kind of embrace it and understand that you will get better at it the more you do, I think it's just it's a little bit addicting because you're getting better, and who doesn't want to get better at something?
In this 4 year journey that you've been taking, getting better, working, going from beginner to pro, there are a lot of learning curves that come up, and they come in many shapes and forms. What was the biggest learning curve for you, and how did you overcome that?
Um, the biggest learning curve for me was probably my battle with perfection. And it kind of goes with my kind of compulsive desire to I put such unrealistic expectations on myself. I just did it again just a few hours before this call. And that's been something I've really struggled with is spending too much time on things that nobody is ever going to notice. And I think it's really hard, especially when you start your own business, to to become obsessed with it almost. And it really takes over your entire life because you have a hard time deviating your thought track to anything outside of your business. And I've seen this with many other business owners that are completely void of photography. It's not just a photography thing, but that's the biggest thing that the biggest hurdle, outside of just getting better at photography. I'm always trying to do that. That will never stop. But the biggest hurdle was really just between my own ears, just trying to figure out exactly how to manage that level of perfectionism. And I've talked to quite a few photographers, and they struggle with the same thing. And I think a lot of it has to do with, the post processing, or I should say, the insane advancements in post processing. I mean, you can sit there and noodle on a photo forever. I mean, there's a million things you can do to photographs now, to where when you have so many abilities to do things, you kind of get caught up in yourself a little bit, to where, is this too much shadow recovery? Is that too little? Is this too much contrast? Is it too much touch? I mean, you can get sideways pretty fast looking at all these different things. So that's something that I've definitely been struggling with. And I feel like it's going to be something that I'll probably struggle with for a while, just knowing the way that my brain operates. That's been the biggest issue for me.
I can definitely echo that. And the expectations and that learning curve of sitting and going for perfection, like I've caught myself zooming in like 400x on a
Oh, yeah.
photo and trying to clone stamp out the tiniest dust spot. But when you zoom out to like fit it to the screen,
Yeah,
you
you don't
can't
see
even
it.
see it. The only reason you noticed it is because you were zoomed in the first place.
Yeah, because you have the ability to do that, but nobody sees that stuff.
Exactly. And I think the other hard part in perfectionism is complacency. And I think complacency leads to perfectionism, because so many times along the journey, we get caught up in negative comments and we get caught up in positive comments. And I think the fastest ticket to improving rapidly is to be happy with your photography. And the question that comes back at that all the time is, well, how do I do that? And it's very simple, one finger in this ear, the other finger in this ear. You're not listening to people who spread hate on your photography, and you're not listening to people who spread love on your photography either. You're coming in there and you're knowing that you did the best you could, and you're finding things yourself that you can improve on in the future, and you're not letting other people dictate what those changes could be over time. And I've had issues with listening to both sides of it, you know, and the positive feedback and the positive comments are the ones that put me into complacency more than others. And I know, like, you probably get comments all the time on YouTube, Instagram, Facebook, anything you're putting out that can almost trick you into that at times.
Oh yeah, absolutely. Some of my favorite photos that I'm most proud of, and you post on an Instagram, and nobody likes it. It gets half the engagement that other photos do, and unfortunately, we've all kind of trapped ourselves in this mindset of the number of likes is directly correlated to the quality of your image, and it's easy to fall into that trap. I know I definitely have. But yeah, when you shoot for yourself, I think that is definitely the most healthy way to do it. And you shoot for your own improvement. That's kind of what I like to think about is this photo better than the photos I was taking last year? And for me, the answer is always yes. Like Mark Denney in 2023 is going to be a lot better than I am right now. And Mark Denney in 2024 is going to be better than 2023. And as long as you have your camera in your hand, you're going to get better every year. Every year. The only way you're going to stagnate or regress is if you just stop taking photos. So I think that knowing that you're going to get better no matter what, as long as you practice, I think that's pretty addicting. And I think that's a very comforting thing, just to know that all you got to do is just kind of be in it to win it and just kind of keep going, and you're going to keep getting better.
Let's wrap up with this and land the plane here. When you are looking back at the last 4 years, and you look at your improvements, your successes, and how you've gone on this amazing ride in just a handful of years, it's pretty crazy if you look back on it. Because I remember looking at you and seeing your YouTube videos. I was still living in Haiti at the time and seeing your videos pop up, and I was like, oh, this is Mark Denney guy. He's pretty good at this. And then looking at that then and seeing where you are now is just insane to see. And I've had the pleasure of watching that unfold along the road. How much weight have you put on in-field photography versus post-processing and getting better at each one of those?
I think that's a very, very, very good question, but I really think it's about 50-50. I really do. Mainly because I subscribe to the thought track that it's not all about the photo. So some of my favorite photos I've ever taken are not necessarily my actual best work, but they evoke some type of memory of what was going on in my life when I took that photo, or I remember traveling to that destination, or I remember hiking in the dark to that location and being freaked out, or whatever it is. There's a story that leads up to all your photos. So I think the photo isn't always the most important thing. It is the end result, you know, and I keep going like this, like I'm holding a photo, but like it is the quasi tangible item if you print it out. But I think that there's a lot more to it than just the actual photograph. There's a journey that goes along with it. What was the second part of your question? I keep going off on these tangents.
Just how did you grow through that, and like maybe what's the weight that you put on it right now?
Yeah, so I think that if you had to pick one or the other, I would probably say that getting it post-processing might be a little bit more important than infield. But the problem with that is you're focused on the end result solely. And I like I just mentioned, that to me, it's just not all about that end result. So I really think it's 50-50. You definitely have to understand how to use your camera. You definitely have to put yourself in the best position to capture great photographs, which means you have to be out there. You have to know how to compose a compelling and an interesting photograph. There's a saying, I have no clue who said this, but how do you make the ordinary look extraordinary? And That's something that I always think about. I'm always thinking about that. And I think that that's a really good thing to keep in your mind when you are looking for a composition is how do I make something that might look boring, like maybe just a river? How do you make it look extraordinary? And that's really that helps me to kind of get very unique with how I might compose a photograph, getting really low, moving behind a tree or whatever it is, getting in the water. But I think that's super important. And obviously post-processing is very, very, very important as well. So it's kind of tough to pick one over the other, but I would have to say I think they're both equally important. I'm not very pleased with my answer there, David. I wish we could start that one over.
Well, let me rebuttal you on that.
Yeah.
Over the years, I had the same kind of approach even just a couple of years ago when I was working on my photography, and we're always trying to get better, right? Like no matter who's listening, who's watching live, like we're all trying to get better. And I took this approach, and I always told people, even on workshops, it's 50% in the field, 50% in post-processing. My approach recently, and I talked about this with Adam Gibbs just a couple of weeks ago, is now I look at it as 80 in field and 20 in post processing, and even getting into like maybe even 85-15. And that is because I kind of feel like the longer that I've sat in the landscape and been patient and watched the light and worked on the compositions, just tweaked tiny, like we talked about tweaking post-processing and cloning stuff out. You tweaking the composition in the camera, I think, is more important than that.
Yeah.
Sitting in the field and waiting on that right moment has often yielded better quality photos that I'm a lot happier with. Now, maybe the viewer, if I were to show two side by side, they couldn't tell a huge difference. But as I see it and I experience taking the photo and having the fun of photography, which is why we all do it in the first place, is the enjoyment of the process of tweaking things in the field using our camera. So that's kind of the growth that I've gone from in the past couple of years to now. And the beauty of it is there's no right answer, right? Like everybody has their own workflow too.
Yeah. And it changes all the time too. Yeah. I think from my experience, my best photos require the least amount of post-processing, and photos that I really liked the composition but there was just something off. The light wasn't that great. Then you kind of have to post-process it with a little bit of a heavier hand, and they might still come out okay. But I think that just in my experience, the best photos captured on location require the least amount of work behind the computer, which I think is always a good thing.
Let's do wrap up with this question, because I do think it's kind of a fun one since we are live on YouTube at the moment. How much time, this is from Trey Forster, how much time do you spend weekly looking at photographic YouTubers, and who are some of your favorites?
I would probably say I spend total time, I don't know, maybe 2 hours a week. But what's interesting is that my favorite or the channels that I watch the most often are not landscape photography channels, are actually street photography channels. So guys like Willem Verbeek, I think is his name, or Evan Rampt from Atlanta, or Joe Allen is fantastic. I love those guys. But I've always had this kind of fascination with street photography, and I'm not very good at it, but I also have not really tried it a whole lot either. But I'm very fascinated by it. I love the idea that I can walk outside of my door and I'm in a perfect location for street photography, as opposed to landscape photographers. You usually got to travel somewhere. So I think that's pretty cool. But landscape photography, or I should say, well, they're both very heavy dependent on light. But I love the way that street photographers a lot of times will look for harsh light to create these very obvious shadows. And some of my favorite street photography images are all captured in very, very harsh light, just to get those very obvious shadows. So street photography channels are kind of my favorite.
That's a great answer. Well, Mark, I just want to thank you so much for spending the time coming and doing this, both live and recorded. It's been fun to watch you over the years and see how your journey progressed and see how your photography progressed as well. So on behalf of everyone listening and watching live, I just want to say congrats
Oh,
and good
thank
on
you.
you. And thank you for coming on the podcast again and
Oh,
sharing your
absolutely.
thoughts.
Yeah, anytime. I appreciate the invite.